You see, Zimbabwe's politics is like a bad telenovela that refuses to end. Same cast, maybe new wigs, perhaps worse lighting. The set hasn't changed since 1980, just the dialogue and who gets to say comrade with more conviction. To understand this week's chaos in Mutare, you must go back to November 2017, that infamous Operation Restore Legacy, the polite coup that sold itself as a military massage for democracy. It was a handshake deal between men who don't trust handshakes, Mnangagwa and Chiwenga. The two architects of that quiet storm promised each other loyalty and transition. One would lead, the other would follow. If that sounds familiar, it is because it is. It's time to give Zimbabwe a second take. So, as we said, Mnangagwa and Chiwenga had promised each other transition, allegedly. We all know what really happened. But I said this has happened before. This is a very familiar story. We started in 1980 with Robert Gabriel Mugabe and Emmerson Mnangagwa. Mnangagwa, head of intelligence. He's essentially the guy that set up the entire security system of Zimbabwe. And of course, you know, Mnangagwa and Mugabe's crowning act right at the beginning, at the cusp of independence, was the alleged Gukurahundi genocide. Moving on, Mugabe had promised Mnangagwa to take over Zimbabwe after him. Of course, Mnangagwa did not expect to wait 1, 2, 3, about 4 decades. And when he was almost there, when he was almost at the finish line, enter the one and only queen of nobility and extravagance and allegedly hitting a girl with the iron in South Africa, Grace Mugabe, Gucci Grace, as she is affectionately known. Grace wanted the power to herself. And of course, she was married to Robert Mugabe. So, you know, Mnangagwa might have been able to sustain his loyalty to Mugabe through handshakes and written agreements, but I think we can all agree that a wife can get a whole lot more done. But Grace was ruthless. It was very hectic how she went about things. It all ended with Mnangagwa himself being accused of treason and then having to flee to South Africa. Enter Constantino Chiwenga. Why did Chiwenga enter the picture? Because he also knew that Mnangagwa had been promised Zimbabwe, and he understood that if Mnangagwa's promise was fulfilled, his promise was just around the corner. And Mnangagwa was not having it with regards to Grace Mugabe. It wasn't really about her credentials. It could have been. It was mostly about the fact that two gentlemen had decided, I will give you the country. Forget democracy, forget voting, all these silly little things that Zimbabweans like to do with ballot boxes, trying to make sure that they are adhering to some system of democracy. Forget all of that. That's not how it works. You kind of just hand it over to your buddy and you let him run with it. And in this case, Mugabe had decided to hand it over to his wife, which triggered the 2017 coup not coup. All right, so you can't do a coup without an army general. That's where Constantino Chiwenga was absolutely present. He said, Mnangagwa, I've got your back. It was actually a little crazy, the rumors that were circulating. Apparently, Chiwenga had spoken to foreign entities. Apparently, Edgar Lungu of Zambia wanted to come and help Mugabe somewhere in between whiskey shots. And apparently, Chiwenga said, if you even try any of that, we're going to make you our target. These are all rumors. What really actually happened was the gentleman did take the country from Robert Gabriel Mugabe. It's weird to say that sentence because the country always belongs to Zimbabwean people. But like we said, they're just passing the ball down the line. They have no concern for you and your little worries about inflation and corruption. So that's what happened. Grace was apparently also used as a bargaining chip with regards to making sure that Mugabe stepped down and Mnangagwa stepped into what he considered his rightful place. So that happened before. It's happened before that the Zimbabwean presidency is promised to someone and then someone starts to veer away. And this is precisely where we are. Mnangagwa and Chiwenga, who swore that when Mugabe was gone, Zimbabwe would rise like Lazarus, reborn and debt-free, corruption cleansed, and the liberation legacy restored. Instead, what rose was Secunda Holdings. Kudakwashe Tagwire, the mysterious oil-stained billionaire, became the new oracle of ZANU-PF economics. So, Kudakwashe Tagwire's company fueled tanks during the coup, allegedly, but now it fuels an entire faction. They called him the financier, but in truth, he is Zimbabwe's unofficial central banker. Tagwire doesn't print money. He buys it wholesale, then sells loyalty on credit. Here is former Finance Minister Tendai Biti talking about Kudakwashe. Whoa, did I say Kudakwashe? Kudakwashe means someone who steals. No, I meant Kudakwashe Tagwire.
His US 360 million treasury bill was not converted to US dollars in February of 2019. He then injected this treasury bill into the local market in June and July of 2019, causing the local currency to literally collapse. The Reserve Bank was forced to act. Briefly, his accounts were frozen, but the net result was that suddenly 360 million US dollars was flooded on the local market and the local currency collapsed. Any watcher of the economy, including the IMF, were frightened by that development. So if you have got this individual, this powerful cartel that can destroy the currency within a single day, then the country can be held ransom at any time. Which is why it is crazy to think that this criminal actually has ambitions to be the next president of the Republic of Zimbabwe. It can't happen and shouldn't be allowed to happen. I feel pity for ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF is being reduced to a commodity that can be bought by a few trinkets, a few motor vehicles, a few GD6s. What kind of a country have we become? Herbert Wulshe Chitepo is standing in his grave. Joshua Nkabukonkomo is standing in his grave. Dumiso Dabengwa is standing in his grave. The thousands of liberators that died in Chimoyo, Nyazonya are turning in their graves. For if they knew that the country and their political party was open to the highest bidder, they wouldn't have gone to war. They wouldn't have gone to war. So it's a shame. Shame on ZANU-PF. Shame on ZANU-PF. Shame on everyone in ZANU-PF that you allow yourself to be reduced to a commodity with use value and exchange value. Which brings me to the attempts to amend the constitution. You cannot amend the constitution to remove two limits without two referendums. One to actually deal with the term limits that are provided for in terms of Section 328. And the second referendum to make sure that when the amendments are made, they benefit you. So ZANU-PF can't make these amendments without these two referendums. Fortunately, the majority of people in ZANU-PF, as a matter of fact, are opposed to this amendment. Fortunately, 99% of Zimbabweans are opposed to this amendment.
So, by 2025, the alliance had fractured into suspicion, poison plots, and dossiers. Mnangagwa, still the master of rural oratory and central committee charm, began whispering about ED 2030 through his cronies, a long road to constitutional glory that conveniently postponed elections by 2 years. But Chiwenga, the ever-disciplined soldier, read that plan as treason against the revolution they both pretended to defend. Zigananda. He called them plunderers. The word rolled off his tongue like a warning shot. The vice president had finally remembered he was once the commander of the army, and that legacy does not retire quietly. This week, the ghosts of that gentleman's agreement between Mnangagwa and Chiwenga came to haunt Mutare. The ZANU-PF National People's Conference, supposed to be a show of unity, turned into a family meeting from hell. You have Mnangagwa's loyalists clutching briefcases full of loyalty allowances, while Chiwenga's men whisper about dossiers and destiny. Somewhere in the middle, Taguire's shiny convoy parks outside the venue, 300 vehicles donated to the party, a gesture so generous it smells of laundering. Each car is a mobile reminder that in ZANU-PF, corruption actually has a registration plate. So ZANU-PF gathers. Chiwenga's camp came armed with papers, not guns, at least not visibly. He presented his now legendary untitled document, a dossier that might as well have been titled The Gospel According to Betrayal. In it, the vice president accused his president of turning Zimbabwe into a syndicate disguised as a cabinet. He named names: Taguire, Chivayo, Sakupanya, Nguwaya, a billionaire choir of plunderers who allegedly looted $3.2 billion through ghost shares and golden handshakes. It was a call for accountability delivered in the tone of a man who once overthrew a head of state. Or did you forget that part? But Chiwenga's plea wasn't heard in the spirit of reform. It was received like a declaration of war, and war it became. Mnangagwa's faction, the self-styled Young Turks of business and patronage, responded through the ever-composed Ziyambi, the justice minister with the calm of a man who knows how to weaponize legal English. On October 14, Ziyambi delivered a 25-page rebuttal so cold it could refrigerate dissent. He called Chiwenga's dossier treasonous, immature, and insightful. 3 words that sound harmless until you remember that in ZANU-PF, treasonous often precedes disappeared. Ziyambi's most humiliating jab, suggesting the vice president be reoriented as the Chitepo School of Ideology, political exile with a syllabus. That insult hit deep. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a reminder that in ZANU-PF, hierarchy trumps history. Mnangagwa's camp rewrote the story of 2017. According to Ziyambi's version, it wasn't Chiwenga who saved the nation, it was Taguire, the businessman turned savior who allegedly funded the coup with 5 million liters of fuel and millions in cash. Imagine the revisionism, rewriting a military coup as a corporate sponsorship. At this rate, future Zimbabwean revolutions might as well have brand partnerships. Econet, anything? No? Okay. Operation Restore Legacy, brought to you by Sakunda Holdings. Yeah, that's what it feels like. This week's developments are no laughing matter, relatively. The Mutare conference has become a political minefield. Soldiers' eyes dark like CCTV cameras. Party youth bust in by the thousands, cheer for whoever controls the lunch. War veterans mumble about betrayal, while businessmen whisper about contracts. It's not a conference anymore. It's an open-air courtroom where history and ambition are both on trial. Now one has to ask, how much did Chiwenga reflect before delivering that damning dossier? He was addressing the president, calling the people around him thieves, knowing full well that they were allegedly empowered by President Emmerson Mnangagwa. That's what the vice president was saying. He's still the vice president. They were sitting together, one next to the other, at their ZANU-PF meeting. And he said it directly in a dossier. You know, you can talk much like me, but when you write something down, everybody knows you're trying to follow through. But again, don't we all think that Chiwenga would have thought this through? He is an army general, a liberation hero that is still standing on 2 feet. And if you know anything about liberation movements, particularly in Southern Africa, is that they are generally loyal to the highest general from them, the highest ranked surviving general from there. So I think Chiwenga thought it through, and that's what gives me the shivers on behalf of, the other faction of ZANU-PF. Because allegedly at the same meeting, and I'm going to paraphrase here, he said, I see you all support Zigananda, the plunderers. I see you all support the plunderers, and I acknowledge it. System clear. Done. He was done. That's it. He was done with this system of ZANU-PF. He was done with the gentleman's handshake. He was done with his assessment. He knew what was in front of him, and he called it out. Are we not worried about what the next move is? And when we say we, I don't know if I'm talking really about the Zimbabwean people, but perhaps I am, because Zimbabwean people do not want to deal with any potential conflict. That's not how Zimbabweans roll. At the same time, Zimbabweans want change. But, change is very relative in Zimbabwe, because it really has been the same men just changing the same clothes. It's been the same party, it's been the same system, it's been the same story. Only this time, Kubakwashe Tagwire is Grace Mugabe. But this time, Chiwenga is Mnangagwa. Who's Chiwenga's support? One wonders. My guess is that generally, if you tell them to stand at attention, they do. If you tell them to stand at ease, they do. And if he walks past them, they salute. Somewhere, perhaps in the back room of a luxury lodge, Mnangagwa and Chiwenga both know the truth. One must fall for the other to reign. The 2017 alleged coup that united them has birthed its own curse. Operation Restore Legacy has turned into Operation Restore Loyalty. What began as the cleansing of Mugabe's ghosts has become the haunting of the liberators themselves. A story that keeps repeating. How long will Zimbabweans press play on this particular song? Look, if the first act of Zimbabwe's modern tragedy was betrayal, the second act is still greed, the kind of greed that hides behind development rhetoric and prayer breakfast. Let's talk more. Kubakwashe Tagwire, the fuel prince, finds himself in the bizarre position of being both benefactor and burden to his party. His $3 million donation to the Mutare conference, coupled with 300 vehicles, was marketed as patriotism, but in reality, it was a down payment on protection. Tagwire isn't just funding the revolution, quote unquote, he's underwriting Mnangagwa's afterlife. Because when you've governed through fear and enrichment, your greatest fear becomes retirement. Chiwenga knows this too. His dossier didn't just expose theft, it exposed the machinery of survival. He accused Tagwire of concealing ZANU-PF's stake in Sakunda Holdings, stealing $1.9 billion through fake Kuvimba mining transactions, and converting state mines into personal treasure chests. And he didn't stop there. He named Wickno Chivayo, the flamboyant tenderpreneur, whose Instagram stories could qualify as economic reports, as part of the same plunder circle. According to Chiwenga, Chivayo looted millions from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission itself. Imagine that. Even the institution meant to count votes was being counted out of cash. Mnangagwa's loyalists, led by Muchangwa, dismissed all of this as fiction. They countered with stories of Chiwenga's paranoia and ingratitude. Muchangwa even resurrected an old tale, the 2018 Bulawayo bomb attempt, suggesting it was orchestrated by Chiwenga's faction. Have a look.
Our vice president decides to turn the presidium into a kangaroo court, an inquisition court, Kutonga president, citing that document, and that document, he got wind of it because it wanted to be given the imprimatur of the South African Reserve Bank of South Africa. That's how the document leaked back to Zimbabwe. So we knew that this document was floating in certain circles. So, of course, the Politburo heard about what they were trying to do, and it reminded the Presidium that you are appointees of the president like us. You have no powers as the Presidium. And it was one person among those Presidium members who was championing that document. They were just being dragged along. They were not even aware of the contents. So when the Presidium asked who had penned the document, do you accept ownership of it individually? All the other members of the Presidium said, no, we don't know where it came from. So it boomeranged on the Vice President.
So, suddenly, history was not just being rewritten, it was being weaponized. Each side began digging trenches in the soil of the revolution. One shot at corruption, the other shot at treason, and the people, as always, whispered nothing will change. But something is changing. Beneath the slogans and dossiers, ZANU-PF's internal war reflects a generational implosion. On one side are the liberation-era purists, soldiers, war veterans, ideologues who still dream in black and green. On the other are the corporate conquerors, businessmen or dealers who wear designer suits to rallies and treat the party as a holding company. Tagwire, Chivayo, Sakopwanya, they are the face of ZANU-PF's new capitalism, where patriotism is performance and loyalty is leverage. And Mnangagwa, ever the strategist, knows that if the war veterans win, his days are numbered. So he leans into the moneyed class the same way Mugabe once leaned into slogans. He presents Tagwire's rise not as greed but as generational renewal. He calls them patriotic entrepreneurs. The irony is exquisite. Zimbabwe's Liberation Party is now liberated from ideology itself. Meanwhile, the Mutare Conference was under heavy surveillance. Reports of heckling, youth intimidation, and paid applause circulate online. Blessed Geza, the exiled war veteran turned YouTuber, has called for nationwide protests. His October 17 demonstration was supposed to mark the first public challenge to Mnangagwa from within ZANU-PF's own DNA. But Mnangagwa has already begun coup-proofing his regime, demoting military loyalists, replacing commanders, and flooding the party with civilian allies whose loyalty is measured in government contracts, not convictions. Still, even the most fortified regimes forget that loyalty is seasonal. Today's beneficiary becomes tomorrow's whistleblower. Tagwire, for all his wealth, lacks liberation credentials. The same veterans who once chanted Pasi na Mugabe, down with Mugabe, may soon find it easy to chant Pasi na Tagwire. Mnangagwa's attempt to hand over power to a businessman is not succession, it's outsourcing. And Chiwenga, the soldier, knows that if power ever becomes negotiable, the army becomes expendable. This is where Zimbabwe stands in October 2025, between dossiers and detonations, rebuttals and revenge. Ziyambi's rebuttal may have silenced the vice president for now, but it has not silenced the story. If anything, it has amplified it, because in ZANU-PF, the louder the denial, the closer you are to the truth. And somewhere between the whispers of poisoning plots and the echoes of war songs, Zimbabwe waits again for someone to restore legacy, or at least finally define it. My name is Ashwin Berry, and clearly Zimbabwe is in for yet another second take. Good night.